This is why, if you look at the country I was born into, is almost unrecognisable to the average Englishman today, because the people have a certain plasticity to them. They can be manipulated quite easily. The English of Elizabeth's day during her long reign could be turned from being Catholics for 1,000 years, to being Protestants within less than a century. Just as here, within less than a century, the English have been turned from what they had as a set of beliefs in the beginning of the 60s to what they have in this beginning of the third decade of the 21st century. So what we can see is how you do it is, you look at the adults, like in England, the adults when I was born. Some of the things that are said today, the adults would never accept. They would regard them as just appalling ideas on the moral level. One doesn't have to spell out what these things are. But what organisations, the cultural leaders, like the BBC especially, would do, they'd say, all right, the adults of the 1960s, we're not really interested in them, we can't change them, but we'll get the kids. So all the children of my generation were raised by the BBC, because by the 1960s, a television is in every home. Pretty much by the majority of homes by the end of the 50s, or certainly by the early 60s, in every home. Black and white TV, but still, it does the trick. And that is pumping out moral garbage. Subtly at first, because if it didn't do it too subtly, the adults who were still in positions of dominance, the World War II generation, would go mental and prevent it any more doing this. Now, what the BBC would do then, they wouldn't have Drag Queen Story Hour then. They'd have a series like Til Death Us Do, which you may not have heard of because you're a young fella. It won loads of comedy awards. The Americans would know it as a series called All in the Family, which they started running in the 1970s, their version. But this Til Death Us Do involves this racist man called Alf Garnett, and his wife Elsie. She's like a long-suffering wife. She doesn't say much, but when she does, she shows she's like not going to put up with this fella too much. He's got a son-in-law, Tony Booth. Now you may know Tony Booth because his daughter in real life was Cherry Booth, who became the wife of Tony Blair. Tony Booth in this series is playing a Labour supporter. Alf Garnett is a hardline Tory. Tony Booth, though, is not just a left-winger, he's in real life a left-winger, but he is in the series as well. And his wife, Una Stubbs, is the daughter of Alf Garnett. So that's the scene. Now, take for example, the 1966 Christmas episode, which is thankfully somebody managed to preserve, because the BBC, either out of sheer stupidity or deliberate corruption, wiped lots of the tapes. They did this with episodes of Doctor Who as well. Useless organisation in so many ways, never mind in its corruption of morals. But anyway, going back to this Christmas 1966 episode, it opens in this living room and the camera is panning around the dining room table. The Queen, God rest her soul, her Christmas broadcast has just been finished, because every 3 o'clock we're going way back into the 1950s, so it's finished, and the national anthem is playing. And so they're sitting there just, fed up. Tony Booth, his wife, Alf's wife, they've had the Christmas turkey and they're digesting it and they're bored. And then there's one chair, empty. And then camera pans out further and there's Alf standing up straight because the national anthem is playing. And it's a great source of comedy. It's a brilliant piece of writing. But you see, men used to stand and women used to stand for the national anthem. But of course it was going out of fashion. And the key thing there is not just to have a comedy moment, but this shows, though the BBC are thieves, sucking the blood via the licence fee of poor people to line their over-bloated wallets, they deserve their money in a sense that they are so clever. They create comedy, not for a mere frivolous purpose, but to make the British people mock monarchy, mock the national anthem, by making fun of Alf Garnett. who is a comic figure, a comic racist. Now, by making him so absurd, what they do, you've got people, and the Jewish guy who played him, Warren Mitchell, he would say, he'd go around, and the people saying, oh right, yeah, you're right thing, those blacks, etc., etc. And he'd say, look mate, I'm not laughing with you, I'm laughing at you. Because the character of Alf was to show up racists, see? But it's a subtle thing, and lots of people wouldn't get it. And one might say, oh well, that's a failure by the BBC, it promoted racism. Here's what, in my mind, is going on. The BBC knew there's a risk that it will promote racism amongst the adult, white, working class population of the 1960s. But it's worth the risk, because what will happen is you will get the young people who are watching Till Death Us Do part to really disdain this fool who says things like, we'll just get Wilson out, who was the Labour Prime Minister at the time, and then we'll get the empire back, right? It's just hilarious. But he's made a figure of fun. And that's how the BBC undermines British traditional values, through the cleverest comedy you can imagine. I would almost take my hat off to them if I wouldn't line them up against a wall.